The expressed powers of Congress. Express powers mean that they're actually written down in the Constitution. So you could look it up in the Constitution. It'd actually be a short snippet that lists that power. Just a reminder, there is a video guide to go along with today's screencast, so make sure you're filling out your notes as you go. First power is one of the most essential and important powers for Congress, and that is the power to tax. Our government can levy taxes, that means create taxes, to pay off debts and to provide services. So when our country first formed, we fought a revolution. The revolution cost a lot of money. Since we didn't have any money, we borrowed a lot and we had a large debt. To pay off that debt, we had to tax. We also use taxes today to pay for things like schools and roads. We pay for health care. There are four main limitations placed on the power to tax. The first one is that taxes can only be used for public purposes. So you can tax and send it into someone's individual bank account. The second is that you cannot tax exports. So any goods that are being shipped out of the U.S. to a foreign country cannot be taxed. The reason we do this is because it would make them very unappealing to, say, Great Britain if we sent them a good that cost more because of taxes. So Americans wanted to make sure that Congress didn't tax their goods to make them less appealing to Britain. The third power is the third limitation, deals with apportioning those taxes. It says that they must be divided up evenly on the basis of population. And the fourth one says that there must be the same tax rate across the nation, so certain areas can't be taxed more heavily than other states or regions. There is a difference between two types of taxes here. A direct tax is one that's paid by the person directly who's being taxed. So let's say you go to buy a pair of shoes and there's sales tax on it, you pay that directly. Now an indirect tax is one that gets passed on from the original taxed person to the next. For example, cigarette companies, they get taxed by the government for the production of cigarettes. However, to cover this tax, they simply mark up their price, so the consumer, the smoker, actually ends up paying the indirect tax. Power to borrow is closely related to the power to tax. The reason that we would borrow instead of taxing is that people get tired of paying taxes, and so one way to avoid charging the American public a tax is to borrow money instead. If you borrow more money than you make, you're doing something called deficit spending. And deficit spending is not a good habit because if you do it for too long, you grow a large debt. And as many of you know, our current debt is very high at over $15 billion and counting. Next power of Congress is the commerce power. Now, commerce, another word that you could substitute there is trade. So the commerce power deals with Congress's ability to monitor or regulate trade that is interstate, meaning between states, or foreign trade, meaning it occurs between the U.S. and a foreign country. There's a famous historical case called Gibbons versus Ogden, and in this case, the gentleman named Ogden was given a ferry boat license by the state of New York, and he was told that he was the only person who could operate the ferry boat in New York. Now, Ogden ferried between New York and New Jersey, and he was upset when a competitor named Gibbons got a license from the federal government to also ferry between New York and New Jersey. And ultimately, it came down to the decision that Gibbons, who had the federal or national license, could do the ferrying because it was between states. So any trade that occurs between states is controlled by the national government and not the state governments. This Commerce power is also very popular in the Civil Rights Act. Uh, the Civil Rights Act stopped hotels and restaurants from discriminating on the basis of race. So anyone who traveled from one state to another and tried to stay in a hotel and was denied was illegally being denied. So they had the right to sue under the Civil Rights Act for fair treatment. Currency power is our next power of Congress. Prior to the Constitution being written, each state had its own currency. Now, this was a major problem because you went from one state to another state. You could not use your same money, your same currency. It was not valid. And so this hurt business between states. Legal tender is an important term that describes any money that must be accepted as repayment of a debt. So if you owe someone some money and you present legal tender, they have to accept it. Examples of legal tender would be paper dollar bills and coins, quarters, dimes, nickels. Bankruptcy is another power. Bankruptcy occurs when a debtor, someone who owes someone else money, whenever their assets, like their house, their cars, their businesses, their goods that they own, are split up, divided, and given to their creditor, the person that they owe the money to. And then their debt is erased. And even if they can't pay the whole debt back, it still goes away. This is what we call a concurrent power. Concurrent means that it is a power shared by the federal or national government and the state government. Congress also has several foreign relations and war powers. Only the federal government can establish treaties with foreign countries. So Iowa cannot make a special treaty with Canada. The reason for this being that Iowa is not sovereign. We don't have complete control over ourselves. Whereas the federal government, the United States government, is sovereign, and they do have complete control. Also, if we had different states making different treaties, we could get drawn into different wars, and even possibly be split up on different sides, which would not be good for our national unity. War powers, another significant power Congress has, they can declare war. The president cannot actually declare war. That is reserved to Congress. Congress can also raise and support armies. So if you think of a military draft, that is Congress's ability to pay for the army. That is Congress's job as well. And they can also call forth a militia. Again, a militia is a volunteer military. Also, some other powers that Congress maintains. One is naturalization. Congress determines what the requirements are to become a U.S. citizen. So how long you have to live in the U.S. Postal power is also included. Power to create postal roads and offices. Of course, this was very important to connect the country and to allow trade and communication to occur between different regions. Copyright power is the right to reproduce an original work. So if someone creates a book or a piece of art, they can copyright it so that no one else can reproduce it without their permission. And a similar power is the patent power. Congress can give out patents. Patent is the right to use, to make, or to sell a certain innovation. So if you come up with a brand new machine that you want to sell, if you patent it, no one else is allowed to make that exact same machine. And our final powers are weights and measures, which the U.S. government does set the standard for things such as pounds, inches, miles. Congress also has the territorial powers. They can add territory, they can change the territories that exist, or they can remove territory. Eminent domain is also included in here. If you remember from our amendments, we discussed eminent domain, the power of the government to take private property from an individual for public use. So if they were going to put an interstate highway through someone's farm or someone's backyard, they could buy their property so long as they provide just compensation, fair payment. And the last one is the judicial powers of Congress. Congress has the power to create federal courts. So the Supreme Court was already established by our Constitution, but beneath the Supreme Court is a number of federal courts, and those are created by the judicial branch.